that light, with everyone being so focused, it gives me great pleasure to move to our feature address, which will be rendered by Ms. Marsha Caddle. And I am going to read a brief bio on Ms. Caddle before she arrives. Ms. Marsha Caddle is a Barbadian economist and public policy strategist who served as Minister for Economic Affairs and Investment in Barbados from 2018 to 2022. She has led the governance practice at the Caribbean Development Bank, managed the Poverty Reduction Program with the United Nations Development Program, and the Economic Security and Rights Program of the then United Nations Development Fund for Women Caribbean Offices. She is a pioneer economist in applying gender and macroeconomic policy frameworks to public finance in the Caribbean, and is a member of the International Association for Feminist Economics and the International Working Group on Gender, Macroeconomics, and International Economics. Her work, her work experience in economic policy and human development spans over 20 countries. Ms. Caddle serves as President and Chief Economist of the BOLD Center, a global advisory company for development from climate finance to energy and infrastructure to nutrition, security, and education, and an implementation company helping institutions, governments, and corporate clients execute in a practical way complex transformational initiatives or simply unstick obstacles that are preventing delivery. And in light of what our principal would have stated, I can think of no better person to come and address the graduating class than Ms. Marsha Caddle.
Graduates, good evening. We are here for you, so I'm starting with you. I want to acknowledge Minister McConney and the team from the Ministry of Education, as well as the principal and the chair of Erdiston and the team from the college. I want to say good evening to all distinguished friends here this evening. Now, the theme that brings us here today is embracing our story. And let me first say that you all look lovely from up here. You all look very well put together. But, or should I say and, I want us to have a little bit of a chat this evening. I want us to have a little bit of a conversation. And Ian helped me a little bit, I hope, by his performance tonight, to help us to free up and just really to start to consider some of the things that are before us to consider. So when I think of the idea of embracing our story, what I hope to be able to take you through this evening in a bit of a conversation is what is the story, what are the many stories of the Barbadian people, of the Caribbean people. What are the many stories of the past, the now, and the future that we want? How should we then be teaching, learning, and constructing knowledge towards that story, towards that Barbados that we want? And what is it about our story and ourselves that is in itself creative and innovative? What is it about our story that is in itself special and transformational, and that from this small part of the globe can help evolve the world? Now, for many years, I came along hearing that children don't have a care in the world. And I want to start here, because I think we also have to start to deconstruct the stories that we tell ourselves in this business of learning and constructing knowledge. So for many years, I came along hearing that children don't have a care in the world, and there was this tacit notion that the only problems in the world were adult problems, big people things. And this manifested not just in how we raised our young people, but also in the spaces that we created or didn't create for them to discuss things and to question ideas. So matters of money and bills and debt and personal finance, matters of love and sexuality and relationships, all big people thing. And there was this idea that children, in not having to confront these issues, did not have a care in the world. How many people came up here and, well, you good, you don't got a care in the world. Right, I see some hands. And of course, that was wrong. By every single measure, that was and is incorrect. It was wrong from the perspective, for example, that love and sexuality and relationships begin to develop as ideas in our infant brains and in our smallest selves. We see it with babies who develop what we perceive as jealousies when one parent may kiss or embrace the other. I know that y'all see all the memes and so on with a child that is between mommy and daddy, and mommy goes to kiss daddy, and the child, a baby, reaches out and says, stop that. Even from our infant selves, we establish ideas of affection and love and relationships. So we know that affection and relationships are among the first concepts confronted by children. Yet our parents told us in our Barbadian story, in our Caribbean story, what girlfriend what? What boyfriend what? You better go to school and learn. Y'all heard that, right? Right. So the idea was that it was one or the other. We also used to hear things as our young people came of age, like two-man rat can't live in one hole, right? The idea that as you are growing up, you have to small down yourself in here, in my house, because there's only one adult must be in here, right? So that Caribbean women and girls also have a similar tension. And from the time the development process of exploring love and sex and relationships begins, it is thwarted and it is punished. And this is just an example of how we miss a chance to create knowledge, to give space to development, and to foster learning and expression. And similarly, we feel that because children do not earn, they do not worry about money or its absence or suffer the effects of that absence. And I'm going to tell you this. There was no one who knew better than I did at age 6 and 7 and 10 and 11 that I was poor, what we could afford and what we could not afford. Children's worlds are so small, and everything they experience is so enormous. Children have every care in the world. They experience, potentially, the cares of their parents, and they develop, potentially, cares of their own just because there are people existing on this planet. And because children's worlds are so small, the adults that feature regularly in their lives are very big, very important. The words, behavior, and relationship of and with those adults looms large in their lives. It is the reason that teachers, who you are, what you say, how you feel, how you are cared for in your work, in executing your duties, is so tremendously important. I remember every teacher I have ever had from age 4 to age 18. And any of those among you who have had the bad luck of hearing me speak regularly know that I reference those teachers often. A few in particular. I talk about Ms. Thomas Wilson of blessed memory, who was my Spanish teacher at secondary school, who was not only one of the most conscientious teachers I've ever met. I mean, the way she prepared for class and the way that she prepared us for success, it was like she was getting ready to fly to the moon, was the level of her preparation. She was not only extremely well prepared, she was hilarious. She was a very funny woman who always made us laugh. She trusted us enough to show us that side of her, to make us laugh, to let us make her laugh, to let us be open and free and a little bit wicked and a little bit rude. Not too rude, a little bit rude. And on that point, I had a chat a little while ago with the class 4s at one of the schools in my constituency as they were getting ready to take the exam. And we were talking about the teachers that they will meet at their new school. Now, these children had a level of trepidation. They were nervous. They were afraid that the teachers they would meet at their new school, in this new experience, would be different, would be more strict, would demand a different kind of performance from them. They were scared. And so we were having a conversation raised by them about the fact that their teachers are going to be whole people with interesting personalities, just like their current teachers. And so I asked them, for example, who's the funniest class 4 teacher that you have? And all in unison, they pointed to this one person, one teacher that was at the back of the class. And so just so you know, children know and like when you make them laugh, they see it as a major talent. But more to that point, they want to see who you are. They want to experience your whole selves. So apart from Ms. Thomas Wilson, I also talk about Ms. Brathwaite at primary school, who was my class 4 teacher and who is my friend to this day, and Ms. Joseph, who worked in school meals, who gave the best hugs and the best advice, and very often an extra scoop of mashed potatoes. She was my favorite. So teachers loom large, but so do other things and other people in children's lives. Young people are learning from and in several places all at once. And in your own constructivist ideas of learning, which you at the college, around which you at the college build your programs, in your own constructivist idea, you know that whatever knowledge is being explored in the classroom or whatever learning environment is building on or sometimes competing with knowledge and ideas and values that your learners already have. I'm going to say that again. Whatever you are teaching, exploring, sharing in the classroom is not coming to a blank slate. It is coming on top of values and ideas and knowledge and information that all of your learners are already bringing from wherever they're bringing. I'm sure many of you hear it. You hear when you say something, well, yes, but my daddy says, or my Sunday school teacher says, or my auntie says, or at football they say. And so all of this challenges our construction of what is true and real in what we're teaching and how we help learners to think. So what and how we teach must acknowledge all the non-formal education that's taking place alongside what's happening in the classroom. All the non-formal education taking place in community groups, on playing fields, on street corners, in homes. So, the first challenge then is how to think. That's the challenge that confronts you as you teach. How do you teach to think? How do we go about coming up with what we know for sure, what we have an idea about, what we wonder, and what we know nothing about? In our story, in our Barbadian story, I don't know about you, but I am concerned about how we come up with what we know for sure, and how we seem to be relying less and less on something called evidence, and more on rumor, and on some of the lazy tropes that we create about who people are because they have a title, or because they have a categorization, or because they have a characterization, because they are a minister, or a principal, or a chairman, or a politician, or a teacher. Now, we will at times be called on to make judgments. Every day we're called on to make judgments, but those judgments should interact with something that we call evidence. And I just want to remind us of a little story that is attributed to Socrates. I'm not sure that it really is a Socrates story, but as we've heard it, it is attributed to that philosopher from some time ago. And the story goes that one day in ancient Greece, an acquaintance met with the great philosopher Socrates and said, "Do you know what I just heard about your friend?" And Socrates said, "Hold on a minute. Before telling me anything, let's put it through a test of 3 things." And he said, the first test, the first filter is truth. Are you absolutely sure that what you are about to tell me is true? And the man replied, "Well, no, I just heard it, and I was coming to tell you." And Socrates interrupted him and said, "All right, so you don't even know if it is true. Let's look at the second test. The second filter, the filter of goodness. Is what you are about to tell me about my friend something that is good?" And the man replied, "Oh, no. On the contrary, it's definitely not." And Socrates interrupted again and said, "So you want to tell me something bad about my friend, but you're not certain that it's true? All right. Let's try the final filter, the filter of usefulness. Is what you want to tell me about my friend going to be useful for me?" The man replied, "Well, not really." And Socrates said, "Well, if what you want to say is not true, not good, not useful, then why say it at all?" I think that we are called to challenge the way that we construct knowledge, what we know to be true. And the way that we do that is through evidence. So our new collective learning from children to adults, especially as adults, has to be about how do we come to and create knowledge? How do we know what exists? How do we know what is missing? And how do we create what is missing to the extent that it is worthwhile to humanity and to the planet to create? How do we know what exists? How do we know what is missing? But let's not stop there. In this Barbados, in this Caribbean, in embracing our own story, how do we create from our bosom, not from anything that we've seen anywhere else? How do we create what is missing that is worthwhile to humanity and the planet to create? The second challenge, the part of our story that we now have to deconstruct, is how we structure the environments for learners. Much has been said about the Barbados Secondary School entrance examination. I support its replacement, but I support it only as part of an entire, careful, considered restructuring of the stratified school system that we have and the society in which it exists. To start there and to end there would not do us the service and do our children and learners the justice that is required in this moment. And I say careful and considered because in your own program here at the college, you acknowledge the role of music and other arts, not just in developing artists, but in developing scientists, tradespeople, lawyers, economists, who can be imaginative in their thinking. The idea that we teach the arts just to develop artists has no basis in reality. We teach the arts to develop creative people. And so we also have to look at the role of scientific learning in developing artists who innovate like Ian just innovated up here with his extra verse and his sing-along. The notion that there are these strict and discrete parts of learning and performing and functioning, that notion has no grounding in reality. And so when we start to deconstruct and we start to build back, let us understand that as we create centers of excellence, as we create schools, middle schools, and new ideas of how people will learn, let us understand that there are reasons that we teach in this multidisciplinary way. It is not just the arts for artists. It is not just science for scientists. It is that we all learn different ways and different disciplines in order to become our best selves. The stratification that we are trying to get away from is not just about the resources that certain schools may have over others, but the other kinds of learning that take place in our secondary schools, which I want us to really understand. The shared values that are created in those spaces and the networks that are born in those spaces. So, we have come to a place where this whole conversation has started to take on a kind of a perversion. And I use that word in its strictest sense. And let me tell you what I mean. We have a system where we have now come to a place where a student who may have come from a poor family goes on to a school that is considered one of the older and top schools in this system that we know we need to unpack and deconstruct. And that poor, struggling student must now be made to feel ashamed of the fact that she or he has accomplished enough to get to that school. So now we have a complete perversion that is borne out in the stratification of this system. We know that when certain students go to certain schools, it is not just about whether that school does not have enough resources. It is not just about whether that school has certain kinds of risks. It is also about the fact that students are socialized throughout that school. They learn the values that they come out with. And they also are part of a certain kind of network that may give an advantage or may give a disadvantage. And I believe that everyone in this room understands how those networks work. I say that there's some who have become middle class by education. That is the kind of Barbados and the system in which we live. And if there are some who have become middle class, who have engaged in social mobility by education, by dint of the secondary school that they attended, there must similarly be others who have been disadvantaged in the other direction. So, as we consider this education reform, I say careful and I say considered, because there are so many social norms and ideas that we have to come to terms with collectively before we move, or while we move. Because we know that we can't always wait for perfect understanding of how things work in order to step forward. We have to step out sometimes in faith, and we have to get it together, and we have to submit ourselves to experimentation. You know what I mean by that? We have to try something. And we have to be big enough to stop and say, all right, this is not working. We got to try something else. That is learning. That is teaching. I want to move quickly to another consideration of our story as we deconstruct. And that is about an approach to development that if any of you have read the draft population policy that the government is considering now, it talks about having a care approach to development, care. So during the recent estimates and budget debate, I started to explore this idea of a care approach to development, which means that there are certain things that the state must do to care for people, investing in care of people, but there are also things that we as individuals must do to care for the state. Now that sounds strange to people because we don't often think about caring for the state as individuals. But I'll tell you what I mean. I started to explore recently the idea of what we call a learning or parental compact. So we know that government has talked about investing in parental classes to be able to support the kinds of learning that have to happen in schools. But I think we have to go further. And I think that a learning compact is something which emphasizes not just the rights of children and families to benefit from a safe and effective learning environment, but also our responsibilities as parents, guardians, and families to help create such an environment for children and for teachers. So the parenting classes for which resources have been earmarked by the government, those are good. But perhaps they should also be accompanied by a contract, an acknowledgement that parents, that the household bear some responsibility for how they help prepare learners for the classroom. In this way, and in this new development model, the state cares for the individual. Teachers teach and care for children in the classroom. But then the individual, all of us, also care for teachers who work on behalf of the state by making sure that children that we send to the classroom are ready to learn. And I think that this starts to explore the idea of collective responsibility for making sure teachers are safe and protected, for making sure other children are safe and protected, and for making sure that we all have a safe learning environment. Now, finally, I believe that in our deconstruction, in our considering of how we move forward at this moment, that we also have to consider the idea of what is educational management and what is educational leadership. And I think that sometimes we may get concerned about the day-to-day of educational management, the fact that schools have to run, the administrative things that make schools and other learning institutions turn over, and that perhaps we might get bogged down by this. And I've always thought that those decisions may perhaps or should perhaps be in another place, and that the state really takes responsibility for educational leadership, for policy and delivery, and that we co-construct what that should look like. And I think that that is another part of the new direction for education, the new reform that we must get engaged in. I taught a little when I was much younger. I left secondary school, and you know, at that time they had a way of calling you back and saying, look, well, you just left, so the learning is fresh in your brain. Come back and give us some help at school. So I went back and I taught, and I tried to be the kind of teacher that I wanted. And I taught at a couple schools at that time. But when I finished my training as an economist, after all that, I was without work for a while. And someone said to me, why you don't go and teach till you find something else? Have you all heard that? And I said, broke as I was, because I didn't have a cent, wasn't working yet, I said, no, I am not going to do that, because I don't want my children to be taught by people who are going and teach until they find something else. I want teachers, the teachers in the classroom, like Ms. Thomas Wilson and Ms. Braffett and Mr. Castani and all the ones that I remember so well and that I had and that I loved. I want teachers to be people who love teaching and who love their jobs. I am aware that the two are not the same. But I want teachers to be people whose work is properly resourced, whose effort is properly remunerated, and who have the support of the state and of all of us who have the support of all of us. So I congratulate all of you for evolving as a people and an institution that fosters learning and the construction of application of knowledge, that over 75 years has embraced the evolving story of this country and of this Caribbean. Learning and education are now at a pivot point, where perhaps before we can embrace a new story, we have to write a fresh story. And I know that Erdiston and all of you graduates, congratulations. I know that you are well placed to lead that rewriting. I want to say congratulations to you all. Thank you. Sure, thanks.
At this time, I want to invite Mr. Kenroy Birch, graduand from the Diploma in Educational Leadership, to make a presentation to Ms. Caddle on behalf of the college.
Good evening. On behalf of the Board of Management, principal, staff, and student body of the Erdiston Teachers Training College, I present unto you this gift of gratitude.